What up everyone, Shark here. Welcome back to the channel. We're into Shark Please Explain Volume 2, where I answer a bunch of your broken arrow questions. We're going to start with how to get top attack penetration and damage with direct fire munitions. I'm going to compare the different rocket varieties for both helicopters and airplanes. We're going to talk about the difference between the Ataka and the Vikhr missiles. I'm going to show you some micro tips and tricks, how to kill helicopters with rockets, how to make the Stormbreaker an actual glide bomb, and then we're going to finish up with a breakdown of Incendiary Munitions just in time for them to get nerfed in the next patch. As always, let me know what I missed, what other questions you have, and what else you'd like to see in these videos. Without further ado, let's get to it. Okay, the first subject we're going to cover is getting top attack penetration on vehicles despite not having a top attack weapon system. So to keep the math really simple, I'm going to use the Ranger Moz squad with the M4 shooting at the BMPT Terminator 2, right? So the Moz has 600 explosive penetration. The Terminator 2 has 1200 explosive armor on the front, 600 on the sides, 200 in the rear, and 60 on the top. Remember, the way explosive penetration works in this game, when the penetration is equal to the armor, it does 50% of the weapon's listed damage. You'll see that when we get into the editor. It'll show a side shot 50% penetration, a front shot because it's exactly half, and explosive penetration is a bell curve. You're going to do 20% damage, and then on top, 600 is so much greater than the 60 top armor. You're going to see 99 penetration and just under 8.5 damage. So remember those penetration and damage values because it's going to be really useful in seeing how the Ranger Moz can get top attacks against this armored vehicle. Now, obviously, when you're going for top attack, you want the tallest building possible. So, for example, the Rangers in this building cannot achieve a top attack. And you see, it's not giving them credit for being at the top of the building. You see with the lines coming out, it's like 3/4 of the way up. But against this target, they're doing 20% penetration because it's facing them. So it's a front armor shot. This is a rear armor shot onto the Terminator, 90% penetration versus 99 for top. So this building is too low to ever really achieve a top attack. These Rangers, again, you can see the line is not giving them credit for being on the roof, just kind of high in the building. Against this Terminator, they do have that 99% penetration. That is a top attack shot. Against this Terminator, they do not. 50%, that is a side armor shot here. And so if you look kind of at the angle, that I think 45 degrees based on my testing is what the actual angle is to get a top attack. So here, roughly greater than 45 degrees onto the target, you're going to get credit for top attack. Over here, past 45 degrees, side attack in this case, because the Terminator is facing this squad here. In this case, even though it's a shorter building, the Ranger's able to get a top attack here, mainly because of the angle. So you got to pay attention. It's kind of coming from the center of the building, so taller is obviously better, but greater than 45, so you get that 99% penetration. Over here, they're not getting it. But if we sprint them out and have them move over to this building, now you see, because the Terminator is so close and they're getting that greater than 45 degree angle, they're getting credit for a top attack on this Terminator here. All right, one last look at a couple different angles here. So not top attack, you get it here. So again, 45 degrees seems to be the magic angle, and keep in mind, the game doesn't give you credit for being all the way on the roof and uses the center of the building. So the smaller the building and the taller the building, the greater the radius of that top attack that you'll get. So one thing I wanted to test is if you could spoof a top attack by using attack ground. So in this case, you see they're just not up, they're not tall enough because this building is so wide, right? From the center of the building, they're not getting credit for the top attack here. But you know, with some cases in this game, you can do weird stuff by using force fire. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Rangers off a hold fire here. I'm going to force fire and try to get rear armor hits. 1.7 damage a pop. It's going to take about 9 hits if it's not getting any sort of additional penetration bonus. So front armor, 9 hits. If you get rear or top armor, it'll be less than that. So have the Rangers aim back here and take them off hold fire. Right, and you see it's still only doing 2 damage per shot here. Now you're still getting the, you know, the critical effects on the vehicle, but you're not getting, even trying to aim behind it, you're not getting credit for rear armor or top armor hits. Okay, so now I want to talk about rockets from helicopters. And so this is really interesting. There are a couple of sweet spots here. First off, the frontal armor on the Terminator 2 is so much higher than the 70 penetration on these rockets. You see almost no damage at all to the front. And based on the editor, the Terminator is going to try to put its front armor towards the Apache, so I can't really modify this, but it's a front armor thing, so you're not really doing much damage here. But you see here, 58% penetration, 2 damage per shot. That's because the Apache has finally broken that 45-degree angle. However, if you see here, there's a min range on the rocket. And so if you're directly over top of the vehicle, you also can't shoot at it all because of the minimum range. So there's this like tiny little sweet spot, right? Where like, okay, if I back up a little bit and now I drop below 45 degrees, now I'm getting no penetration. And if I go too far forward, all right, yeah, I can get some good hits there, and boom, now min range. So all that being said, you can get credit for top attack with rockets, but against truly armored vehicles, if I allow these Terminators to shoot back, they're just going to smoke the Apache. So really no reason to do that, no reason to try to close to that range. And the other thing is, if you've got your helicopter at low altitude, you're never going to be in a situation where you can get that top attack on any of these vehicles. Now, with aircraft, especially aircraft-borne rockets, you'll see kind of the same issue here. Rockets in range, but almost no penetration on the front armor of these Terminators. And as the A-10 gets close, you'll see the calculator will say, hey, you can actually penetrate now, but the A-10 can't actually shoot that close with the rocket. So rockets really ineffective against the front armor of vehicles like this. Okay, so functionally what this means is really it only applies to the super high-end vehicles with a ton of frontal armor. Your standard BMPs, your Lavs, your Strikers, they don't have enough front armor for that top attack with some of these handheld AT weapons that already have like 600, 900 penetration for that to really matter. But if you're doing something like trying to attack a Ranger Maz squad in a building with a, Shermaviki squad in a Barbarous, just keep in mind that once you get right up next to the building, you're actually giving your opponent the opportunity to penetrate the top armor. It's something like a Maz squad where they fire in rapid succession. They'll be able to beat that active protection too. As a counterpoint, just keep in mind if you're putting your infantry in buildings, high rises are good, but it doesn't guarantee a top attack, especially at range. That's the advantage of units like the Javelin or the TOW-2B, where the missile itself takes a top attack flight profile, but you can get some benefit. And if the enemy is crowding buildings, hopping into the building adjacent to it will give you a better penetration chance than not. The other thing to remember is units vehicles are automatically going to face their front armor towards whatever they see as the primary threat. So you might get 1 or 2 hits off, but if you don't get that top attack, you'll see the vehicle rotate and your penetration and damage will go way down. Okay, so following in a similar vein, I've been asked a lot about the variances in the Russian rockets. So the first thing I want to talk about is the S8 versus the S13 rocket. And the S13 has almost twice the explosive penetration and about 60% more damage. But remember, that's explosive penetration and damage, so it's not always going to translate at the cost of a quarter of the munitions. Now, the costs are more or less the same, right? Plus 30 for the first rocket pod, plus 25 for the second between these two models. But you'll see here, in certain roles, this difference in damage and penetration doesn't really matter. But in the munitions quantity, it certainly does. So let's get into the testing. Okay, so now we're going to show the S8 rockets here. And you can see it doesn't do much damage per shot onto the front armor of the Terminator 2. In fact, I think most of the damage is coming from the splash of some of these rockets getting side and rear armor hit values. Because pure frontal armor, yeah, there's a lot of RNG there. And in the testing, sometimes it kills the Terminator, sometimes it doesn't. But 80 rockets and not enough to kill the Terminator from the front. All right, now using the S13s here, you can see they have slightly better penetration, slightly better damage against the front armor. But as they come in, a lot of the damage that they're going to do is going to be from these RNG side and rear armor hits. And the magazine size is just so much smaller. Yeah, 20 rockets, it does kill the Terminator, but it's more or less the same chance of killing heavily armored vehicles from the front. It'll take the entire magazine to do so. So more or less the same as the S8. Now for the next test, I'm going to look at the rockets against lighter armored vehicles, in this case Lav ADs, which is your primary threat when you're flying Russian helicopters. So as I take it off hold fire, you see the rockets make pretty good work of the Lavs. It's basically 2 volley hits per Lav to destroy it. So not bad with the S8s, and you see over half of the magazine still left. Comparing it to the S13 here, and the biggest thing you notice, I forgot to disable the cannon. The biggest thing that you notice though is the explosive radius on the S13s is much larger. So when the vehicles are tightly clumped up, you're going to get kills faster. Now you're almost out of your S13s here. And if you only had 1 pod, you definitely run out before you got the kills. So not an ideal use case, but I think if you're worried about enemy shoreheads, S13 may be slightly better than the S8 at dispatching them quickly and allowing your helicopter to work against other vehicles and other threats. Testing against infantry in buildings. You'll see in this case, right, because infantry are in cover, the magazine size is going to make a much bigger difference than the overall damage, right? It's less about penetration, it's about the number of shots, because the penetration buff from the S13 not as helpful, and because in the building the explosive radius also not as helpful. And here's the S13 performance. You see it does good damage, but only having a quarter of the number of rockets means that it's just not going to hold up in the long run when working against infantry in buildings. All right, now let's take a look at infantry in the open. And in this case, the lack of cover, you're doing a ton of damage with every shot. But because the infantry are spread out, at least with the S8s, the explosive radius isn't as good. So it's still going to take several volleys. But, you know, against infantry, like this is easy pickings for these helicopters. And 80 rockets is enough to clean up 2 Marine squads, which are pretty chonky. If we take a look at the S13s here, and they're able to engage quite at range against the Marines. The problem is these squads aren't clumped up, and with only slightly more damage, the S8s are just better because there are more rockets available. Now, you're almost never just going to have rockets on your helicopters, especially not with something like the K-52, which is just such an awesome chonky helicopter in the first place. So what I would recommend is using the S8 rockets by default. They're going to be better against infantry. They're going to be better against, in most situations, just because of the sheer volume that you get. The damage output and extra penetration of the S13 is not enough to really make it valuable, with the exception of if you plan on using this platform to counter enemy shore adds, right? If you're up against like a striker build or a Marine build, and you're not using them against heavy armor, the S13s are slightly better. And in that case, what you'd want to do is almost kind of hit and run. You find the enemy shore adds, you come with your helicopter, you clean them up, and then you back off to restock. If you pair the S13s with something like fire and forget missiles, they'll also do really, really well. So that'd be like the one use case. But against infantry, against heavier armor, those the S8 rockets are going to be better just because you have more of them available. You'll spend less time resupplying. Now, one cool thing you can do, and this is very similar to using laser guided artillery to kill enemy helicopters, laser guided rockets can follow laser designation onto other helicopters, even though the rockets will tell you they won't shoot at helicopters. But you can see here, it won't allow me to attack the alligator automatically. So I have to use force fire at the ground. And once I do that, you'll see the rockets will actually, let me take off hold fire. The rockets will actually follow the lasers and smoke that enemy helicopter. The downside to this is there is no unit in the game that has both no helicopter in the game that has both laser designation and the ability to shoot laser guided rockets, right? There is no overlap. Otherwise, you know, if you had like a Kiowa with laser guided rockets, you could designate for yourself and then fire the rockets at the ground, use it to kill helicopters, and you saw kill that helicopter relatively quickly. That doesn't exist though, so no need to worry about it, but just something you can use in a pinch. If you've got drones, if you've got snipers nearby, designate the helicopters, it'll help your munitions hit. One other thing to note, I have had issues getting drones to effectively laser designate enemy helicopters. You're better off doing it with a ground-based platform like a sniper or a B-fist. All right, in the vein of rockets, I also get asked about rockets on Russian aircraft, especially Russian ground attack aircraft. And so the stats for the S8 and S13 are the same, but I do want to highlight these S25s. So 340 explosive penetration, 17 damage, and then if you look at this is where it gets really wild. 98 meter blast radius. These are absolutely nasty. So just like in a previous video when I suggested, hey, if you're going to build an aircraft for a strafing run, the rockets can be really valuable in just kind of increasing the damage. And so there are a couple different options here for the Russians, right? Your primaries are going to be Su-25M from mechanized, Su-25T from the motorized infantry. You've also got the ability to put the rockets on the Su-33 and the Su-24. I think those are a little bit less valuable, mainly because Su-24, really you should be using that as a seed aircraft. The Su-33 is really too expensive to be doing strafing runs, which are basically one-way trips. But these Su-25s, they are very, very cheap. And then even you can potentially get this one with 16 Vikhrs alongside the Su-25s. So pretty wild setups here. What I'm going to do is show you the difference that these rockets make in testing. So this first strafing run is an Su-25 with just the S13 rockets. I'm going to let it continue to use its cannon here because that's consistent. But when it comes to make the strafing run, see, the rockets actually do a fair amount of damage, right? And so despite the low penetration, I think what's happening is you're getting some RNG as the rockets hit. They get side armor hits, they get rear armor hits. And you can see it's able to expend all 40 rockets in the strafing run. Only one tank killed. But even that armada is a good trade for the Su-25. All right, this one, we're just using the S-25 rockets, only 8 of them. But watch how much damage these do as the Su-25 comes in on the strafing run. I mean, that's 2 dead armadas, 2 dead Barbarous, and then 2 Terminators that really just need to sneeze on to kill. So significantly higher damage, and again, all expended in a single strafing run. All right, we're going to compare that performance now with an Su-34 with 6 KH-38s, which are very expensive air-to-ground missiles. And you can see just the high armor value, right? The quantity of the rockets actually makes a big difference. The KH-38s are guided and they're going to hit more directly, but it takes 4 to kill the first 2 armadas. And so the BMP Terminators in the back really aren't even touched. A little bit of the cannon, and the Barbarous are still alive. So something to keep in mind there, that like the rockets might actually be better for you depending on the spot in the strafing run. All right, compare again now Su-25 with just the Vikhrs. So similar cost is 245 points in this setup to the S-25 rockets. And these missiles are guided, which you'll see, like even with a little bit of that ripple fire there, he's not going to be able to shoot all of his missiles in a single pass. It only ends up killing 1 armada out of the entire column. So this is what is potentially problematic. 7 of these missiles are left, but like how often do you get an Su-25 through a full strafing run and have it be completely alive and set up for another pass if you're up against a good enemy with a good air defense network? I'd say it's pretty rare. All right, now we're going to add the Vikhr AGMs, and you can see he's already shooting him as he comes in. Now the rockets hit. And the combination is just absolutely savage. And he still has half of his Vikhrs left. Now, didn't clean up the entire armored column on this run, but still really nasty. I think, personally, if you've got good recon, the Vikhrs are really nice. But the S-25s, just 8 of them is enough to make this a super, super effective aircraft for trades, right? Think about it. So 235 points. In this case, you would have traded it basically a 4 or 5 to 1. So keep that in mind. Su-25 is really, really good. The S-40 and the S-13 rockets, they're fine in the grand scheme of things, but the S-25s on these ground attack aircraft, if you're going to have them set up for strafing runs, highly recommend to get lots of air units on the field and do a lot of damage to enemy armor columns. The only downside is the strafing run has to be on point, because they are not guided missiles. But as much as the enemy might think they can dodge, right? Like if you get credit for side hits, that actually does a ton of damage and gets you a ton of penetration. So something to keep in mind moving forward. So just to clarify, if I'm running the SU-25 and I'm using it in a strafing run roll to deal with enemy armored columns, I like this setup here. 8 S-25 rockets, 2 R-73s just to deal with helicopters. That's 265 points. You can get a bunch of these out in support of your ground attacks. And you can just always kind of have these available. They're not super fast. You're not really expecting them to survive the strafing run. But if they come in, if they just get one tank, they've paid for themselves. And you've seen they can get 4 or 5 if the enemy's vehicles are clumped up. All right, and the last one of these kind of weapon comparison questions, you're looking at the difference between the Vikhr and the Ataka ATGMs. The example here is the Alligator has access to both. And you can see from a penetration and a damage standpoint and from a numbers standpoint, they appear to be the same, right? 950 penetration, 11 damage, 12 per, but the Vikhrs are more expensive. And you might be wondering why. And that's really easy to answer. All right, so let's start with the Atakas. And you'll see these are good guided ATGMs, but they shoot one at a time, right? So then the missile won't fire until the previous missile has hit its target. And in this case, you're watching with the active protection, the Armada is basically bouncing every other shot, which also keeps it from immediately panicking. And in this case means it's going to take, with taking 5 hits, it's going to take almost 10 rockets with the 4 active protection charges. So now you're going to come in on the second tank, and that's just not ideal, right? And that's the downside to the Ataka here, right? Only 1 hit on the second tank because of the active protection. All right, now let's take a look at the Vikhrs. And the big difference here is that they will ripple fire. So you can have multiple missiles in the air at once, which means now you get 2 hits in before the active protection recharges. Right, and so it's still not perfect. You're still going to basically only do partial damage to the second tank. But you do more damage and you do it faster. And I think that's the most important thing here with these helicopters. The faster you can get these missiles away so you can get back out of sight, the better, right? You want to get your kill and get away. And so that's why the Vikhrs cost more. They're just going to be better than the Atakas across the board. All right, this is going to be a little bit of a rehash, but this is the best way to use laser guided munitions. So you've got your F-35 coming in. It's at low altitude, right? When it gets close, and this is a little bit of a judgment call, you order the strike, and as soon as you do that, your F-35 is going to come to high altitude. I usually give it a turn order away, right? And then I just watch. As soon as it releases the bomb, I'm going to send it to low altitude, right? Leave afterburner on to try to get it away from the target. This works for all laser guided munitions, obviously. Nothing really surprising there. But one thing that you can do that's kind of interesting, and it only works with the Stormbreaker. It actually doesn't work with the other laser guided munitions like the J-Sal or the J-Dam, because I've tried it. Might work with a missile, but that's a little bit different. But here's what we're going to do. I'm going to call in the Stormbreaker here, and then I'm going to come back in and reselect laser designate. And we're just going to watch this F-35 come in and drop. And now because I'm starting farther away from my target, now it's not an afterburner, but it should drop sooner. Now watch, as it comes in, you can actually redirect it and glide bomb it in closer. Now it's kind of crazy. You have to have good line of sight with the snipers, but that's the first time I've seen the Stormbreaker do Stormbreaker things where it actually acts like a glide bomb. There we go. Got it to work again. A couple of things I noticed just in trying this out. You really need the aircraft to be running in line with the trace that you're going to draw with the laser. The other thing is, like, while you're microing this, you're not doing anything else in your flight. So the chance of the F-35 getting shot or, you know, your other infantry getting knocked down, also kind of problematic. Just keep that in mind. Cool trick. If you can pull it off, it's like a 1 in a million Death Star style shot. But not something I would necessarily count on game to game. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is incendiary munitions. Right, I'm going to start by going over the 2 incendiary infantry. You've got the Green Beret Flash and the Ogniumychiki, right? The fire throwers. That's what it means in Russian. And so weapons are very similar. A couple of minor differences here. And I'm going to use the Ogniumychiki because it's just simpler for the calculations. But their flame round does 10 damage with a 50-meter blast radius. The Green Beret Flash does 8 damage with a 40-meter blast radius. It's incendiary, so it does its damage over time, right? And so you'll see when we get into testing, it does the damage very slowly if this is all you're using, but the damage stacks with each additional rocket, which is pretty nasty. So let's get into it. For the purposes of testing, I'm using a Desantniki squad, which has exactly 10 models or 50 total health. The Ogniumychiki round does 10 damage per round, but it takes about 15 seconds for each rocket to flame out. So what I'm going to do here, just based on the math, it should take 5 hits to kill this squad. I'm going to have it shoot 1 at a time, and I'm just going to speed up the video for all of our sanity. All right, and there you go. It took a 6th rocket. My guess is that it's not exactly even damage all the way across the area of effect, which is why I took an extra rocket. But if you allow it to go 1 at a time, you'll just slowly burn down the enemy. The whole point here is that that 10 damage is distributed over the length of the flames being on the ground. It's not 10 damage instantaneously, and that's not the tick rate. Now this time, I'm just going to let them take 6 shots as fast as they can, and we'll see how much faster this squad goes down. You can see just from the animation, a lot more damage getting done. 6 rockets is definitely plenty. So the whole point here, though, is that the damage from fire stacks, which is probably what Steel Balalaika was getting at when they talked about having to nerf incendiaries. But multiple rockets will do significantly more damage over time. All right, and now we're going to look at a couple of clumped up squads to include one in the building to demonstrate that it will do that 10 damage independently to multiple units as long as they are in the blast and burn radius. And as it said in the armory, the flamethrowers ignore cover. So you can see these 2 squads burning down. Actually, the squad in the building dies first because it's closer to the center, and the squads on the outside die just a little bit slower. All right, to give you a comparison between the 2 different incendiary launchers, the Green Berets and the Ogniumychiki, we're just going to take them off hold fire here. This is just their incendiary devices. So you see the Green Beret Flash can fire 4 shots very quickly, and then it has an extended reload. The Ogniumychiki fire 2 at a time. And so we get off all 8 rockets while the Green Berets only get 4. And so they do kill the unit in the building faster, but now they are out of incendiary. Whereas the Green Berets here will kill these Desantniki and still have 4 incendiary rounds left in the chamber. All right, and now a comparison when we let them use all of their weapons. You see the Green Berets get quite a DPS boost from their small arms. Right, and so they're going to end up still using 8 rockets, but they kill the squad kind of the same rate as the Ogniumychiki, who are now out of incendiary. So basically similar performance and similar DPS based on the differences in the squads and their other weapons. Incendiary rockets and incendiary bombs work kind of the same way, except really just got to keep in mind that the damage stacks based on the number of munitions. So the Grad, these are only 10 damage per rocket, but there are 40 rockets available here. So first thing we're going to do, they shoot 20 per salvo by default. We'll speed up the aim time. Right. And then you see these rockets come in and all of that damage stacks, and these squads are going to burn down very, very quickly. Even the squad over here just kind of on the edge of the barrage, taking a ton of damage and getting panicked. Keep in mind with the Grad, right? The dispersion increases the further you are away, but in some cases, a little bit of dispersion might be helpful. So it's up to you to determine how close you want to get when you launch. Being a little bit further away can be good because some of that RNG as the rockets spread out might help you. It's also worth noting sometimes the rockets aren't super visible. So when you're on the receiving end of this, sometimes the fire will just kind of sprout under your units, and that can be super, super tilting. But, you know, 20 times 10, that's 200 total damage here. These squads, all they have to do is get hit by half of the rockets and they're destroyed. The next option are your fighters can drop bombing rams. These are high drag bombs, right? So a lot of people will use these with cluster munitions, but these are 40 damage per munition. So you can set up, this is going to be the F-18. You set up the bombing run, 4 of these firebombs, 40 damage per, right? And so these squads at 100 apiece. So basically 2, as long as 2 and kind of a quarter of the firebombs touch each one of these squads, that will also do a bunch of damage. So based on the dispersion there, these guys are only going to take a little bit of damage, mostly from that initial cluster. But these guys definitely going to burn down. Again, about 15 seconds for the incendiaries to fully burn out. So the damage is done over time. But you can see some of it still catching this squad here. So incendiary firebomb is really nasty. The Russian equivalent, the Su-34, also has some good options. So, and again, I've got these kind of mixed with cluster bombs and the incendiaries. I think that's the best combination. Allows you to deal with vehicles and then APCs, right? If you know, you destroy the APC, the infantry inside are going to pop out, but they pop out right into some fire, which is super fun. All right, and here comes the Su-34 in on this bombing run. Clusters and incendiaries away. All right, you see the clusters go off, and then yeah, that's a lot of damage happening relatively quickly in buildings. And this because of the spread, all of them getting hit, 15 seconds to burn out, and all 4 squads destroyed. So it's something that I recommend. A lot of people talk about mixing clusters with like snake eyes or the retarded bombs from on the Russian side. I think the incendiaries are better at dealing with infantry, clusters for vehicles, incendiaries for infantry, and you're good to go. All right, that's going to do it for this video. I hope this was helpful. I really enjoy doing these videos and the testing that goes along with them. As always, let me know what you want to see. Don't forget that in between these video releases, you can lean on sites like barmary.net for stats comparisons. Check out guys like Koraske and Operative Lex. They do unit and tactics breakdowns. Their videos are awesome. But thanks for watching. We'll catch y'all in the next one.